watching Bengals Breakdown by Chat Sports, and I am your host, Stone Shields. Thanks so much for hanging out with us here on a Saturday afternoon. Coming up on today's show, we're going to be talking some Jalen Ramsey trade rumors. Last week, it was reported by Ian Rappaport that, hey, the Dolphins and Jalen Ramsey are going to be separated from one another for the 2025 season. At this point, it would probably be a shock if Ramsey was in a Miami Dolphins uniform come week one. So we're going to be spending some time talking about that. Also, an article dropped this morning coming out of St. Louis about some rumors about Cincinnati perhaps relocating to St. Louis to play football there. It's complete nonsense, but we're going to break that down here on today's show. Also, there is a noteworthy 30 visit that I do want to discuss here for Cincinnati as well. But before we get into that, make sure you guys hit that sub button if you haven't done so already. That's youtube.com/Bengals TV. We are trying to get to 18,500 subscribers prior to the NFL draft. Obviously, the NFL draft is around the corner. We're going to be heading down to Dallas, our Chat Sports headquarters down there, on Wednesday. Draft, obviously, a couple of days after that. Make sure you guys help us get to that 18,500 subscriber mark prior to the draft. That is the goal. We can get there, 287 subs away. Help us out for all the best Bengals news and rumors coverage. Hit that sub button for me right now. All right, so as I mentioned, the Miami Dolphins and Jalen Ramsey are exploring trade options, and I would be shocked if Ramsey was back on the Miami Dolphins this time. Well, I shouldn't say this time next year, but week one of the 2025 NFL season. It really just feels like only a matter of time before he gets shipped off to another team, and it does feel like Ramsey, by the way, is going to have some pull and some say in regards to where ultimately he lands. Here's what Ian Rappaport put out last week, a couple of days ago on April 15th, saying the Dolphins and seven-time Pro Bowl cornerback Jalen Ramsey are mutually set to explore trade options, and it wouldn't be a surprise if he played elsewhere in 2025. Miami and Ramsey could be parting ways. Again, I really consider it very likely that they do indeed, in fact, part ways going forward. But Jalen Ramsey isn't nearly the player he once was, right? I think there was one point where people looked at Jalen Ramsey, okay, this is the clear-cut best cornerback in the National Football League, and I don't think at this point he still sits in that same category, but he still has elite production, he still has elite ball skills, and I think he could come in and help lots of teams in the National Football League. When you take a look here at his contract, I don't think really teams are going to have to give up too much in terms of compensation when you're talking about acquiring Jalen Ramsey, because taking a look here at some of these numbers, you got to pay him quite a good chunk of change if you are going to get him on your roster, so I don't think you're going to see him go for a top-of-the-line draft pick. As I mentioned, I don't think the trade cost here really is going to be very high. So obviously we're going to talk about perhaps Cincinnati being a team that could be on the lookout for Jalen Ramsey. And the Bengals, of course, don't want to give up a lot of draft capital. I don't think that would be necessary in order to acquire one Jalen Ramsey. But you do have to keep in mind he turns 31. All right, he will turn 31 here shortly, and he is an expensive player. And really, that's not kind of the vision that the Bengals currently have on defense. We'll get to that here more in a second. But also, the Dolphins paid him last year in September. I think that's kind of why we haven't really spent time talking about perhaps Jalen Ramsey as a trade candidate, because it kind of is crazy that they are shipping him after paying him just last September. And really, the last time Jalen Ramsey was traded, he has been traded before, of course, when the Rams acquired him, when they shipped him off to Miami. They were giving up a third-round pick in the process as well as a backup tight end. And this, of course, was a couple of years ago. Ramsey hasn't, fallen off a cliff by any stretch of the imagination, but it has declined a little bit. And as you get a little bit older, especially at that cornerback position, I think your value does go down a little bit. More on this around the corner. But I want to hear from you guys. Would you trade for Jalen Ramsey? If you are the Cincinnati Bengals, let me know in the comments of today's show. Type Y for yes or N for no. If that ad comes here on YouTube, that is totally fine. You can ignore it. You can take advantage of it. Get down in the comments. Let us know what you think. The reason we're kind of tying this in with the Cincinnati Bengals is Bengals legend and Ring of Honor member, of course, Chad Ochocinco, Chad Johnson, expressed interest in the Bengals going after Jalen Ramsey. Basically, ESPN put out kind of similar to what Rappaport was saying, that, hey, these two sides are probably not going to be together here in the 2025 season. Essentially, Johnson quote tweeted it and said, "Dear," and then tagged the Bengals at Bengals, basically saying, hey, try to get Jalen Ramsey here to Cincinnati. And look, I do think you should ponder it, right? Jalen Ramsey is a top-of-the-line cornerback. Want to make that very, very clear. He's getting up there in age, but he is still at the top of the league in terms of his production out there on the football field. And I've been banging the table here for a veteran cornerback ever since the 2024 season wrapped up. Obviously, your priorities have been in different spots this offseason, as they should. Worried about T. Higgins, worried about Jamar Chase, Mike Gesicki, things of that nature. And I think kind of the cornerback room has kind of taken a bit of a backseat to that, and you weren't able to bring in a veteran cornerback. Now, this would go against their plan on defense, as I previously alluded to here on today's show, in two ways, right? First off, just from an organizational philosophy perspective, right? Cincinnati doesn't do this kind of stuff. We've come on this show and said that several times that, hey, they're not going to make kind of splashy moves, right? It's not something you see with that with this organization, but also their plan on defense, right? Their plan on defense was, we're going to bring in a new guy to call the shots in Al Golden, and that is going to be our big-time acquisition. It's not going to be a player. It's going to be a new guy coming in calling the shots as the coordinator and hopefully drafting and developing around Al Golden. Bringing in a veteran like Jalen Ramsey, of course, kind of goes away from that vision. When you take a look at what they have right now at the cornerback room, I think you saw some promise in some of these guys, but also some injuries kind of derailed some of these guys' season, particularly Dax Hill and DJ Turner II. Hopefully Cam Taylor-Britt can bounce back. Got him in that cornerback one spot, but he was the furthest thing from a cornerback one for Cincinnati this past year. So it's a room that I think needs to be addressed. I would like to address it more so with a veteran player than a rookie that you would perhaps draft here in a week or so. But I think I would be really intrigued in terms of trying to get in a guy like Jalen Ramsey. But I understand if Cincinnati is not going to be fully on board with that because, it would be a very, very splashy move, especially for a team like the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll continue with our show here in a minute. But first, I want to give a shout-out to our friends over at Game Time, as today's show is presented by Game Time. Game Time makes getting tickets faster and easier, even for hard-to-get playoff seats. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA playoff tickets. They got last-minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last-minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Really love the zone deals. See even more when you choose a section, and let Game Time choose the seats for you. Also, the all-in pricing. Toggling this feature up front allows you to see your total up front so you don't get hit with any of those surprise fees at checkout like some of those other ticketing companies can get you with. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code CHATSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. But again, create an account and redeem code CHAT. SPORTS for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest prices, all guaranteed. All right, I want to spend some time talking about this nonsense that dropped a little bit earlier this morning here on a Saturday. Fox 2 dropped an article this morning about the Bengals potentially moving to St. Louis, as in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, I do want to make note, be very clear here off the bat. One, this is ridiculous. But two, Fox 2, where is that news organization from? Oh, yes, you guessed it, St. Louis, Missouri. Let's take a look here what Nick Gladney had to write for Fox 2 in that article. He said, although it's unknown whether the Bengals are considering St. Louis as a possible relocation destination, many are speculating about the factors in St. Louis that might entice the Bengals to relocate there. In fact, according to NBC Sports, Bengals owner Mike Brown has spoken out against the move and was rumored as one of the two owners to vote against the Rams' move out of St. Louis to Los Angeles. As I just said, this is a St. Louis news organization, right? This isn't, somebody out in New York that's kind of floating this around. No, this is the city basically saying, oh, we would like this team to come to our city. And, that makes sense from a news organization perspective. It's my way of thinking that there should be professional football in St. Louis, right? We're approaching 10 years since, the football at the professional level has left St. Louis. I feel like, St. Louis is a good city. You got, obviously, the Cardinals in St. Louis. You got the St. Louis Blues hockey team as well. It feels like the NFL should be back in St. Louis. So I understand that, teams are going to get linked to that city because that would probably be one of the few cities at the top that really would like to have an NFL team there. Obviously have had one in the past. And if I'm another city, of course I'm interested in the Cincinnati Bengals. So I'm not banging on this these Fox 2 people too much here for bringing this up because, yeah, if I was them, I would love to be floating around the idea of bringing the Cincinnati Bengals to town, especially considering the fact that, hey, they're kind of at the top of the league as far as, you got this thing going on with your stadium, this lease, it's about to end, are you going to renew it, what are you going to do? And at the same time, you also have a lot of star players on that football team, and they're a very, very entertaining football team as well. Let me be very clear. Issues need to be resolved when it comes to the Bengals and trying to figure out how to stay on the banks of the Ohio River, which, by the way, we have that all broken down on a previous video that we did about a week or so ago. So make sure you check that out fully to understand what the heck's going on with the Bengals and their stadium. But this isn't happening, right? We talked about, yeah, there's a chance that Cincinnati might be moving out of downtown, but they're not going to leave the greater Cincinnati area altogether and go to a place like St. Louis. It's not going to happen, but I did think it was noteworthy to talk about here because this did drop here this morning on a Saturday, April 19th, by Fox 2 putting this out there about, hey, the Bengals potentially relocating to St. Louis. Another opportunity for you guys to get involved with our show here at Bengals Breakdown. What's your concern level with the Bengals leaving Cincinnati? Let me know in the comments section. Scale it for me, 1 to 10, 1 on the low end, 10 on the high end. Do want to break down another pre-draft visit for Cincinnati before we get out of here on today's show. Last week, we broke down kind of all their 30 visits that have been known to this point. There's a couple other names in there that we will discuss on future videos, but did want to spend some time talking about J.J. Roberts here for the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, you might not have heard of J.J. Roberts, and that's completely okay. Dane Brugler does not have a draft grade on him. He actually lists him as the number 28 safety prospect in this year's draft. Now, we've talked about, guys from Marshall, right? Mike Green is a guy that many people view as a potential target for the Bengals in the first round. A guy like J.J. Roberts, certainly not a first-round guy. A lot of people think he might not even hear his name called during the NFL draft and could be a UDFA type of player. More on him in a second, but let's get to what Dane Brugler had to say about J.J. Roberts, saying Roberts has the body type of a cornerback, but the mentality of a safety with the way he runs the alley with speed and conviction. Led the team in solo tackles in 2024. He explodes into ball carriers, although he often opts for the big hit instead of relying on tackling fundamentals. He plays with impressive range and coverage, led the Sun Belt in passes defended in 2024, although the speed he faced against Ohio State gave him some trouble. Overall, Roberts has the athletic profile, production, and playmaking temperament that could make him a draft pick. Now, I do want to make note here, this isn't uncommon for Cincinnati when you're talking about their 30 visits. They often visit with guys that, hey, they might take at the very end of the draft / take after the NFL draft in terms of a UDFA, so it's not uncommon for Cincinnati to do something like this, but J.J. Roberts is really floating under the radar. He actually was the highest graded safety in college football last season per PFF. Obviously, it's PFF. It's not, the gospel by any stretch of the imagination, but I did think that was noteworthy. I really like lots of elements about Roberts' game. He's a tough physical dude. As we've talked about, the Bengals need to address their safety room, whether it be early in the draft or later in the draft or as a UDFA. Roberts could potentially be a guy that Cincinnati targets, especially if he doesn't get his name called in one of those 7 rounds of the NFL draft. But did want to make note, J.J. Roberts expected to visit with the Bengals here this week as a top 30 visit. Make sure you guys give me a follow on Twitter at StoneShields_. All of our Bengals Breakdown content will be posted to our Twitter page. So help me out. Give me a follow over on